right, thank you. So this is my second talk out of 4. After this, you'll be half done with me. I'm going to talk today about our Florist Survey. So again, I know a lot of people didn't get a handout. Next talk, I'll start on this side, but we'll make those available. So I'm going to talk about a lot of statistics. Don't write it all down. We'll supply you with this information. But before I go forward, I really want to acknowledge these other folks because they deserve a lot of the credit. So Kinda Curtis is an economist at USU. She's a marketing specialist who really did the heavy work in designing this survey for florists. And we worked very closely with the Utah Cut Flower Farm Association. A lot of the farmers developed questions that we asked the florists as well. So today, I'll just share a little bit about the Utah Cut Flower Farm Association, a bit about the survey and the florist responses, and some kind of take-homes. Even though it's in Utah, there's trends across the country that we can take home from this. So again, I want to acknowledge the Utah Cut Flower Farm Association. They were the ones who wanted to have the florist survey in the first place. Every month we have a Bloom and Zoom, which is a Zoom webinar in which there's some educational talk. And last year, one of the farmers wanted to find out, what do florists really want from us when we're selling wholesale, and what are barriers for them to buy more? So that was the whole bait. And so they came to me and I brought in Kinda and we made this whole survey. And so that was the background for this. So much credit to them. So I also want to talk a little bit about sales trends in Utah, but I think this is kind of across the board. Most of our cut flower farmers are selling at farmers markets. It looked like in Savannah's survey, that was about what was happening here. And we found that a lot of times when farms get really established, they start to move wholesale and work with florists. And so as Savannah brought up, that there can be stricter quality standards for selling to florists. A lot of times in starting out and selling at farmers markets, it's tempting to grow all the things. And then in moving to working with florists, maybe specializing in certain things that the florists really want. And so that's a little preamble to say what to just kind of think about when we're going to move into wholesale. So I'll try to yap a little bit less so we have more time for questions at the end of this talk. So the florist survey background, a little more on that. So this all started in 2021, so pretty recently. Fall 2021 is when we initially surveyed the florists, and then we actually resurveyed them again this past fall. So we actually keep an Excel file that has all of the florists that we know of in Utah and then surrounding communities. So if they're just across the border, they count. So we had about 130 florists with email addresses. We had 37 respond the first year and 63 respond the second year. So just keep that in mind. It's a good response rate, good enough for us, but there were even more in just this past October. We had about 25 questions on average. We added a few more for our second year. And so, all right, with that. So I'm gonna have a bunch of these graphs. They're all formatted the same way. So basically we ask the florist this question, we give them these options, and then the bars represent how many florists selected that response. So the bigger the bar, the more popular that was with florists. And then I have data from 2021, and then I'll show 2022. So the first thing we wanted to know is, who are your clientele? Who are you surveying? And we found that most of them in 2021 were doing weddings, and daily florals came next. This is really important because the first thing it tells us is, what color are they gonna need a lot of, right? This isn't too surprising. There's a lot of weddings in Utah. And so when we surveyed them again in 2022, we saw it followed around the same trend. So weddings were big, and so were daily florals. Daily florals are interesting in telling us about colors because that can be very seasonal. Early in the year, pastels are important. By the end of the season, bolder colors, right? Oranges, rusts, that's gonna be more important. So that just tells us a little bit about colors, or we can read into that a bit. The first year when they answered other, these were their responses. So a lot of corporate type things. So we included that question in our second year, and you can see that covered the florist pretty well. Okay. All right. For the florist serving weddings, The next thing we wanted to know is what is the size of these weddings, right? What can we really support? And we found that most of the florists were serving right around this range of $1,000 to $3,000 were the wedding expenses. And I want to show 2022. This is super interesting. So that price range was still pretty popular, but so was less than $1,000. This tells us, to me, what I read into this is what stem length are they going to need for these weddings? So yes, there's a standard stem length for certain flowers, but if it's going to be a huge Park City resort wedding, they're going to need some big stems. They're going to need that Pacific Giant Delphinium maybe. But these smaller weddings, smaller stems are going to be okay too. So most of our florists were working with everyday clientele is what this tells us. And then we also, a little bit more about the florists to get a feel for them, is we wanted to know how many years they've been in business. So this is this is a generalization, but some of the newer florists were more open to local cut flowers as opposed to those steady wholesalers for people who are in business longer. That's not always true by any means. In 2022, we really had a nice spread across years of experience. So that's just a little bit about it. And then we also asked if they expected floral sales to increase in the next year. So in 2021, what they were thinking for 2022, and then this year, what they're thinking for 2023. So in both cases, they were overall thought, yes, floral sales were going to increase the following year. But I want to point out that there is a bit more uncertainty for next year. So we had these write-in responses of why did they think that? I know this is too small to read, and so what I just want to kind of summarize is say that, so for 2022, people were really optimistic because they thought that, okay, all these weddings that have been postponed and other events, that's going to happen in 2022. So there was more certainty about it. That's kind of what that summarizes. And then when they're thinking of next year, there's a lot of concern about the economy, if we're going to be in a recession, and the issue of inflation. So just knowing that that's in the minds of the florists, there's no way to predict, but those are some things to think about, that it might be a bit more conservative coming up. So then we asked what percentage of flowers were sourced from local farms. So the reason why we asked this question, and just to be totally transparent, we don't know the size of the market in Utah. We really don't. And that's why Kinda's excited. She's getting involved. It's exciting because as people learn about local cut flowers, the market grows, right? But if they don't know about it, and so this is our first taste of trying to find out about the market. So what we found in 2021 is that, so this says none, this says 10% or less of their flowers were sourced locally. What this shows us is that most of the flowers aren't coming local. There's a lot of room to grow. In 2022, we saw something similar. So there's a lot of florists who aren't sourcing anything locally. 10% or less, this is 11 to 25%. This is the area where we saw the most growth. Right here I have a table, and it just gives the percentages here. So 14% of florists in 2021 said they didn't source anything local. 16% in 2022 is about the same. 36% said 10% or less. So together, 14 plus 36%, 50% of florists were sourcing 10% or less local flowers. A lot of room for growth once again. And we did see a little bit of that growth here in 2022. We also saw some growth down here, but again, our survey, we did have more responses in 2022 as well. So 66% of the florists who responded said that flowers are mostly sourced from wholesale farms in California, South America, and imports coming through Miami. We'll talk a little more about wholesale coming up here. Our next question was, if you source from wholesale providers, what are your primary challenges? We want to know what those problems are because that's an excellent thing to include in local cut flower marketing. Whatever the competitor's not doing well, we want to do well. And the number one thing that was said is flower quality. Some said none. Now, I don't know, maybe some florists may have no problems with flower quality. It also could be the case where they're not sourcing locally, they haven't done that before, and so they just don't know that local flowers can be better. When we had our visitors from Tennessee come to Utah, they said that their florists get excellent quality flowers, so they don't know that this would be as great of a market. But our florists, we've talked to them a lot. They really stand by the flower quality being higher from locally grown, and then also this flower selection. A lot of millennials want to have these unique flowers that we're able to support locally. And then here are some other things that can be issues with wholesale. But what I say are these are the top considerations for local farms to really try to move into this market. And then to know that we won't win all the florists, and that's okay. So then we asked for the next year, what % of flowers would you like to source locally? And it was really very similar across years. And if you can remember back to how many people were saying they source 10% or less or fewer, in looking ahead, they want to source more, okay? So there's a desire there, there's an opportunity for the market, and this was really exciting because we've seen this rapid growth in farms in Utah. There can be concerns about competition, but what this tells us is that there is room right now. Don't know what the ceiling is, but we haven't gotten there yet, not nearly so. What do you feel are the benefits of sourcing flowers locally? So I put these kind of in order of what they selected the most. So 21% said promotional. Being able to say to consumers that they're supporting the local economy by sourcing from local farms. They bring up this whole quality standard with better vase life, this unique selection. These were the top 3 things that came through. So, and there's a couple other things. So these are very nice ideas to include with marketing. This is what our local farms can do. Your local farms can do that maybe wholesalers can't. Now, one of the issues, I'll just go back a sec. Reliable supply was not high on the list. This is one of the key barriers, as we'll see, for being able to source more locally. And so this is what my take home here is that this is what we have to work on in Utah. So then we asked, what barriers do you currently face with sourcing local? And again, it really came down to this issue of lack of inventory and supply and lack of types/varieties needed. So these are helpful considerations. I actually think lack of inventory/supply is fantastic. Again, it tells us that there's more room in the market. They need to produce more flowers. There's not necessarily such an issue of competition. And I think our flower farms have kind of moved through that, but that was a really big concern a couple of years ago. And it still can be. So then people who typed responses of other, and these, I highlighted kind of the key terms. They need greater quantities. They need a guaranteed crop. It can't be last minute, just impulse purchases with a van showing up. They need some sort of scheduling. I loved this response. We need more flower farms. And so difficult to work with, so we'll talk a little bit about that too, and seasonal availability. So preferences when sourcing local cuts. We found that the florists have pretty close relationships with flower farms. It also would be really, they're so busy as business people, to be able to coordinate with 10 or 15 different farms is tricky. And so what we found is that there's this relationship, typically 2 to 5 farms they're working with the most. One of the things that's come out this year in a big way has been, we actually have 2 co-ops now that help group all these small micro farms together. And hopefully I'll have time to talk a little bit more about how they're doing that. The one I'm most familiar with has about 17 micro farms involved, and they've been fantastic at kind of being the middleman with florists and talking to farmers and saying, you grow this well, grow more of it. And the farms actually bring their flowers to the co-op, and the florists come to the co-op to buy. That's been very successful to streamline the process, and it helps that bottleneck, I guess, of florists working with a lot of different farms. Then we asked, how much are you willing to pay above wholesale? And we went anywhere from 0% on up. And so what I will say is that as a business person, I don't know how forthcoming I would be about how much I'd pay above wholesale. But some florists, so we found overall they were willing to pay up to 20%, but most of them were around 5 to 10% over. Some absolutely said none, but there was a little bit of a premium based on local flowers, not a whole lot. And so that's actually something my lab's been working on. We run these production trials, but we also sell the cut flowers through a co-op. I raise the prices, and so it looks like I'm the bad guy, and we figure out what sales are like off of that. We can talk a bit more about that, I think, in my next talk. But what they really need is quantity and the right color, and they had requests for specific crops. So this question was the minimum number of bunches that they needed weekly from a local grower. And I was impressed with this, 2021 and 2022. So this says fewer than one bunch per week. This is 2 to 5, 6 to 10. So this 2 to 5 range was most popular. So a bunch could be 5 to 10 stems, whatever you can hold in your hand usually is the standard. That's really not so much, but it does tell us that if a farm is very small, it's good to focus on just a few things instead of growing all the things. Then we asked how many flower deliveries would you need weekly from a flower farmer. This is only in the 2022 survey. Here's my first grad student, Megan, during our Snapdragon trial. Less than 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So 1 to 2 deliveries was most popular. And then we asked about color trends that they're seeing for their business in the next year. Not surprisingly, white is very popular, and blush came in next, then salmon. So these kind of pinks and whites, which makes sense because these florists are dealing with a lot of weddings. So my question, or my kind of question, rhetorical question for you is, when you're working with florists, find out who their main clientele is. That's going to give a lot of insight on the colors. They also wrote in colors too, so I just wanted to bring that up. A lot of different pastel-y colors. I keep hearing about blue. That's been all the rage in 2022. We're putting in a delphinium and larkspur trial right now to work on that crop next. And then we asked if there's a color that's difficult to obtain from the wholesalers. These are just tick marks that I made depending on how often the florist mentioned that color. It's not super fancy, but I highlighted the ones that came up the most. There's no color that's difficult to obtain. Blue, brown, terracotta, rust, or white are what they answered. Then we asked about flower varieties that they're used a lot and can be difficult to obtain from wholesalers. This is my tech in Salt Lake, Amanda, with some of our dahlia trials. And these are the ones that came up a lot. And I bolded the ones that really came up a lot. Dahlia, dahlia, dahlia. I wanted to stop trialing that darn flower, but I can't. It's so popular. Came up again in 2022. So these are ones that it really makes sense. They're tough to ship, right? They're harder to get from wholesalers. So those are ones to prioritize. This is a ton of words, but we asked which kind of flowers would you prefer to get from a local grower? And I highlighted the ones that came up the most. Again, I just made a tick mark every time they said the crop type. So dahlia, delphinium, lisianthus, ranunculus, garden rose. So roses with a scent. When flowers have a scent, they have a shorter vase life. And so to transport that in, we've bred roses to not have a scent. So growing garden roses is very popular. The first thing someone does when they get a bouquet is they want to smell it. That's a great way local can have a little bit of a leg on wholesale. I was surprised with zinnia. It's such a common one, an easy one to grow, but it is very much desired. And then we asked about greenery. Eucalyptus always comes up, but what I noticed is that this is where the most, I don't want to say open-mindedness, but creativity came in. They're looking for different types of greenery that they're not getting wholesale. Raspberry, thornless raspberry, and blackberry have been very, very, very popular. We've got farms that have rows of, there's this one farm that has 2 rows of blackberry that they just hack it, let it sit for a year while they're doing the other row, and they've made a killing on blackberry greenery. So these are some of the things that the florist wrote in, not difficult to obtain, but pricey. Hardy and interesting greenery. The wholesalers can get everything, but I want to try new things that they don't often get in, and maybe a local grower has. So these are just some ideas. And then we asked if the availability of local flowers has benefited their business. Most said yes, 78% in 2021, 68% in 2022. Some said no. Again, some of them aren't working with local flower farms, so there wouldn't be a benefit. And a lot of people just aren't sure. And I think that means that there's just room for more education about local cut flowers. They wrote in a few things. So some of the comments from the florists were, so what they prefer from local farms. One said everything if it was possible. Any they can grow, exclamation. Everything, any and all varieties, all way more hardy and full from farm. And so I just want to put that once that relationship is established, florists are very loyal customers, and that's great to see. But we also saw we have almost never sourced from a local grower, so we don't know what is best from them versus a wholesaler. So I really truly see this as tremendous opportunity for that education, and that there's room in the market as they become more and more aware of local flowers and the benefits of it. So look at that. I've got some extra time. My summary for this talk is that local cut flowers are growing in popularity with florists as awareness increases. There's a lot of promotional aspects about supporting the local economy. We had, when I had the Tennessee folks come in this May, I took them on probably too much, but we went on a tour of a lot of things, and we had florists join us at some of the farms, and they can be the best advocates. We had this one florist, which is up in Cache Valley, where I live, where it's a more rural area, and she was doing so much of the education, and she would actually say to people who came in, do you want this peony for $6 or this one for $15? And the people, when they could see the difference, they went for the local one. And so once they're on board, they can be really great with that education and messaging. There is more of a barrier to get in with florists, but once that kind of overcomes it, it's really becoming a fad now that we're a few years in. Know your florist if you're interested in working with florists. They're so busy, but there is a little bit of a slower season around now or a bit before now to just talk to them and learn about their clientele. Most florists are really willing to share that information, find out what their challenges are, and that's a great way to slip into the market. And then finally, it's not all rainbows and unicorns, right? There's some barriers to work on. So this whole idea of reliability. One of our issues in Utah is that the temperature fluctuates 40 degrees in a day. We get snow into June, all this stuff. So it's really tough to schedule when something's coming in. But I think with more and more experience growing a flower, you can start to predict, right, when it's going to come in based on when you plant it. And having that ability to schedule helps florists know not to buy that from wholesale. They can count on the local flower farm. And again, I think this is so exciting that it's really coming down to this issue of supply, that growing the right kind and more of it. So with that, if you could please fill out my evaluation. Utah State really needs it. I've got my lab website and Instagram on here, and thank you. And if there's any questions, we have 7 minutes.